Why should every entrepreneur really master storytelling to grow their business?
If you want to connect to customers or clients, you want to be the kind of business person that someone wakes up in the morning after having heard you speak or seen your commercial or heard your pitch. And, 3 days later, they're still thinking about it. And they're like, I got to get that thing, or I got to talk to that guy. That's what you want to be.
How can two people tell virtually the same story, but one person connects with the heart and mind and the other person just falls flat?
Well, I mean, one tells a story and the other one sort of reports on their business.
Okay, let's kick off. And again, big thank you, sir. You're an absolute legend. And let's do this. So, where I'd love to start is why should every entrepreneur really master storytelling to grow their business?
Oh, well, I mean, if you want to connect to customers or clients, you can choose to present book reports on your product or service, which is what most companies do. They just sort of talk about how they made it and what it is and what it does. And there's nothing memorable or appealing or emotionally connecting to do that. I mean, the good news is most people do that. So, most business people do a poor job of storytelling. So if you're doing a poor job of storytelling, you're just like everybody else. So that's the good news. The bad news is you're missing out on enormous opportunities to actually connect with customers and,
Mm,
to land in their hearts and their minds in a way that they're thinking about you long after you're done speaking. You
mm.
want to be the kind of business person that, someone wakes up in the morning after having heard you speak or seen your commercial or heard your pitch. And, 3 days later, they're still thinking about it. And they're like, I got to get that thing, or I got to talk
Mm.
to that guy. That's what you want to be.
What's the deeper like psychological effect there? So how can two people tell virtually the same story about growing your business or whatever, but one person connects with the heart and mind and the other person just falls flat?
Well, I mean, one tells a story and the other one sort of reports on their business. A
Mm,
story essentially touches people in terms of their mind's eye, meaning it creates a visual that they can see. And once they can see it in their mind's eye, now it's memorable. And then ideally, it touches their mind in some way, meaning it
mm,
changes their mind or makes them think about, the world or the product or the problem in a new way, and then touches their heart,
mm,
meaning they feel something about it. So that's what a storyteller does. We put images in the minds of the audience and then we use those images to put ideas into the head and feelings into the heart. And when you do
mm.
that, then suddenly you're memorable and meaningful and, connected to the people you're speaking to.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because a lot of, let's say, successful entrepreneurs are guys that are even just a couple of steps ahead. When they're telling a story, it may not directly relate to someone who's a newbie, right? Like, how can I relate a 10 million a year business to someone who's just getting started? However, there is a story in the essence of how he started it or how it came to be. So, what's that relevant? What's the relevancy factor there to really tie it to the consumer?
Oh, well, the number really doesn't matter. I've worked with people who own a mom and pop shop, and I've worked with the vice president of marketing at Salesforce, and they're essentially doing the same thing. It doesn't matter if one is managing, $10,000 a month and one is managing $10 million a day.
Mm,
You're still telling a story, and so quite literally, the strategies that I help, to help a person who owns a pizza joint sell more pizzas, they're
mm,
identical to the strategies I'm helping Microsoft use to sell their products. So you should
mm,
separate the idea that just because you're new or you've been in business for a long time, there's no difference when it comes to storytelling. The same strategies that filmmakers and authors and showrunners and playwrights use to entertain audiences are exactly the same strategies we use in business. And it
mm.
doesn't matter what your profit and loss statement looks like. It's all the same.
Let's go through that, right? So, with the origin story, which by the way, I have absolutely remaked 1,000 times with all of our students, which is by the way, actually I gotta tell you about the context. It is something that they come in and they work with us on and they read your book and they're like, this is probably the most impactful thing that we could ever show them. And it's literally like by reading your book. How do you how do you tell that origin story authentically? However, not making it like a sob story, effectively. Before we move any further, I have one short question to ask you. Have you been enjoying these episodes so far? Because if you have, I would truly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel to help more business owners grow their online business today.
Well, it's only a sob story if there's something to sob about.
Mm,
the first thing I'll say is if you have one origin story, you're probably failing. You know,
Mm.
our life is a journey, it's a bunch of steps. So if you were to ask me what's the origin story for me as a storyteller, I could tell you a moment when I was 10 years old and I wrote to Steven Spielberg because I thought the movie E.T. was sort of broken. And as a 10-year-old, I was watching the movie and thinking, there's a bad scene in this movie, Steven. What are you thinking? And I actually told him in the letter, I said, if you send me your movies ahead of time, I'll tell you where you're making mistakes so I can help you fix them. Right. But I could also tell a moment when I was 17 and I stood in front of a class for the first time on a dare from a teacher,
Mm.
telling me that what I had written was not very good. And my classmates responded brilliantly to it. And he actually acknowledged that once I spoke the words off the page, they were much better than he ever imagined. That could be an origin story for me, or it could be
Mm.
the first time I went to the Moth in 2011 and stood on a stage and told a story and became a real storyteller. So,
Mm.
depending on who I'm speaking to will determine what my origin story at that moment is. And so, as
Mm.
a business person, you better have a lot of stories because what you ideally want to do is to be a person like me who the problem isn't that I have a story. The problem is I have so many stories, I have to strategically choose the right story at the right moment. That's a great problem to have. So,
Mm.
first, identify all of those pivot moments in your life, all of those moments where your life turned in a significant way and moved forward, in the direction that it's headed now, and identify all of those as origin stories so you have a
Mm.
basket full to deal with.
What's funny is because when I started, well, this business, I would say 2020, the story was I started in my bedroom with a $60 microphone, and now like we've built this like multiple seven figure like a media company and XYZ, all the highs and lows from there. But because we're kind of pivoting away from just working with podcasters, I've had to downplay that origin story and also like emphasize more on the other stuff I do. So like the business that we build and everything that comes from there, because it was appealing too much to podcasters. Whereas like that's not who we're targeting anymore. It's basically business owners who use
Uh-huh.
content. So it was interesting because about 2024, we had to dial down that emphasis on how I started and dial up maybe like the past 2 to 3 years of where like things were quote unquote successful. And it's interesting because that's still part of my journey, but it's just not what you hear anymore because it's just not as relevant anymore. And that was kind of something, kind of a belief I had to shed, right? Because you're like, oh no, like I want to hold on to this, I want to protect this. I can still use that story, but maybe just
Yes.
in a different context.
Yeah, or just lean it. I always say lean a story and it will work for you. So, what you describe as podcasting, 4 or 5 years ago, you can now call it content generation,
Yes,
right? I got
100%.
into the content
100%.
generation business, which is what you do for businesses, right?
Yes.
You help them produce the content that they need to reach their customers. So,
Mhm.
you lean it one way, you lean it another. You say podcast one day and you say content the next day, and then your story still works.
What I really love about Storyworthy and everything you do is about the present tense moment. And I think something that I struggle with a lot of people struggle with is how much focus should you put on that story, especially if you're doing like a presentation or a pitch or so on. It's like if I was to tell that story of how I started, that could arguably be 40 minutes. I get into the nitty gritty details, like maybe like the tactile experiences of what it was like in my bedroom and everything, but it's just not as relevant. So when there's a series of stories, how do you how do you put emphasis on the most important parts? Like, is that 10 minutes? Is that 50 minutes? It's how long is a piece of string, right?
Right. I mean, if you're telling a story about your origins as part of, let's say, your pitch, the talk you're giving, I probably wouldn't tell a story longer than 5 or 6 minutes. To go
Mm.
longer than that in the actual story, you got to be really good. An eight
Mm.
minute story told by an average storyteller feels like 20 minutes. And so, I say your stories ideally, especially if they're like part of something larger, should probably be somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes at most.
Mm.
And some of them are going to be like that opening story that sort of lands you in the minds of the audience. And then you can use the other ones as examples and, as ways to move the story forward.
Mm.
But you don't want to be telling something too long because honestly, unless you're really good and honestly really funny, or you understand how to like deal suspense relentlessly and constantly, unless you can do those things, shorter is better. The shortest version of every story is the best version of every story.
Let's double tap on that. So there, you mentioned suspense and humor. So it's interesting you said this because I've had a public speaking coach I think to be honest, man, since we have had our first talk, it really kind of started to ring in my brain about how important it is for delivery. Like I've recorded, tens of thousands of hours of content, but it wasn't hitting as well. So one thing that's always recommended to me is that humor element. It's like self-deprecating when I'm doing presentations. It it almost brings down the guard of the audience. How do you kind of do that if someone is actually literally not funny? Like, is it something they tee up?
Well, people are only not funny because they don't understand the strategies of humor. I teach
Mm,
26 humor strategies, which is essentially here's how to be funny. And some are easier to use than others. When you meet someone who you think is funny, what they really are is someone who has either learned or absorbed without thinking the strategies of humor. And once you start to learn the strategies, you almost can't unsee them.
mm,
I'll teach someone, oh, here's a way to be funny. And suddenly they'll call me, they'll say, I just watched a comedy special. That person used that strategy 14 times in an hour. And I say, yeah, they use it all the time. I use it all the time too. So it's not that you're
mm,
not funny. It's just you don't have the strategic awareness. It's like math though. You couldn't multiply until someone taught you how to multiply. For some people, you can't
mm.
be funny until someone teaches you how to be funny, but it's a learnable skill. And if you want to be good, you're crazy not to use it. It's like going to a job site without a hammer, thinking you're going to use a rock to pound in a nail. It'll work, but it's not going to be fun.
What are some of those strategies?
Well, the easiest one for business to people to use is nostalgia. The problem with humor in business is so many business people are afraid to try to crack a joke because if it fails, they feel stupid.
Mm,
So what I like to do is teach strategies that if they use them and they fail, they still don't feel foolish in the process. So nostalgia is the idea that when we talk about the past, the way we used to live, it's often very funny. It's either funny because you laugh at the way you used to live. You're like, my God, I can't believe it. But you're right. We used to live that way. Or if you didn't live that way, if you're younger, you laugh because you can't believe the way the world used to be. And it's really useful for business people because even if people don't laugh at your jokes about nostalgia, it's also informing the audience at the same time. It's informative and funny. So, for example, I was working with a company that was sort of like a job retention and hiring company, like an Indeed version of, the
mm,
world. And the way I wanted them to open their pitch was to talk about how, in 1986, if you wanted a job, you had to sit on your porch and wait for a 16-year-old on a bicycle to drive by your house and throw a newspaper at you, which was essentially at that time the internet. All the information you possibly could have on the job prospects in your area, because you could only work in your area,
mm,
were inside a newspaper being transported by a teenager to you. And then you would open up that back page and there would be like 50 jobs and you would circle like four of them and then you'd make actual phone calls to real places and talk to secretaries to try to find out something about the job, which is to say, the employers had all the power back then. And if they told that story, with a little more attempted amusement, that both informs the audience about how employers used to have all the power. And today, really, employees have a lot of power. They get
mm,
to choose whether they're going to work in Mississippi or Manitoba. They can work anywhere. So suddenly the newspaper is irrelevant. Suddenly local is irrelevant. So you can use that to inform the client about the changing landscape of the business that you're in. But at the
mm,
same time, you can be really funny doing nostalgia too. And if people don't laugh at it, it's okay because I'm still informing you of something. So that's just one of the many strategies I teach. Some are much more applicable to business than
mm.
others, but you can learn them and then you can just be funny.
This is so awesome, man. I'm even just thinking through my own example. So, like, I even have a photo when I lived in Singapore at the beginning of our business where it was myself, my wife, and my dog. We had no furniture. We were using a cardboard box inverted as our dinner table. And I was dialing, like I was calling, taking sales calls and everything. And then the kind of example that I have with that is, well, now with content, people come to you, right? So it's like back in the day, I was literally on the floor with a dog calling people. And of course, you can inject humor into it. And now it's easier than ever, so it's that comparing contrast. I think it's like having fun with it too, right? There's an element of like, my coach also says to me, like, you can see in someone's face when they fucking hate it. Right? When they're like, they hate to be there. They're like, I hate everything about this. Uh, it just shows in your face, right? Like humor, humor appears in the face, and also
Yes.
likability shows up. So there's a huge kind of part about being the charismatic leader. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that. Like, how important is that kind of have that not necessarily ego, but have that. attitude that like you do really love what you're doing, and that transmutes across to your prospects.
Are you an agency owner, coach, or consultant looking to scale your online business? At Volks, we help business owners scale their online business with content. We help them specifically build a high ticket offer, create content that turns into clients, and also help them with the sales process to make sure every single call that's booked in your calendar turns into a client. If you want to see more about exactly how we do this, hit the first link down below and watch a full free training on how smart entrepreneurs are building a business in 2025.
Well, for sure. If you don't like what you're doing, you should definitely find someone to replace you and go do something else. One of my sort of superpowers, I was recently pitching a keynote to a company. I was down to three of us, and my speaking management team said, make a video. And it's a big deal. It's a big keynote for a very large company. And the two people I'm competing against, I saw their resumes, and they have great resumes. Like I would have hired these guys instead of me for sure. But, my secret power is I just make a video. I make a 20-minute video of me talking to the people who are making the decision. And my management team says, here's the three things that they're looking for. Here's the three things they're worried about. And I barely talk about that. I mostly just chat them up and make them laugh and tell some stories. And I got the gig. And my speaking management person said, I never would have sent that video in the past to a company. It was like all over the place. You were talking about your uncles and how much you don't like them, which had nothing to do with their business in any way. But then they sent an email back and they said something like, Matt is a magical bard. We want him at our company, which is
Mm,
just like, I love what I'm doing. I like talking to people. I like telling stories. I
mm,
demonstrate confidence. I demonstrate knowledge. And when you can do that as a leader or a salesperson or anyone,
mm.
people will be drawn to you. If you want good quality people working for you and you want customers and clients coming back again and again, you have to be someone who they think he's the person or she's the person in this realm that I want to be doing business with.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's just you need to be a good hang. I often say,
Mhm.
like, if you're trying to get a job and there's like three of you left, like me, it's basically the one you want to hang out with. You
Yeah,
know,
so
at some
true.
point we decide everybody has the qualifications. Everyone can code. Good. All three of these people can code. Who are we going to hire? We're going to hire the one we want to have lunch with. We want to hire the one who, if we have
Mhm.
a disagreement at work, they're going to be a decent human being during the disagreement. That's what we're looking for. And storytelling can get you there.
That's so interesting, man, because a lot of time it's the litmus test is who do you want to sit on a long haul flight with? Who
Yeah.
are you willing to sit down with for that 9 hour period of time? So in the context of sales, it's really interesting. So I have a full sales team, and a big feedback I always have for them is you have to make it enjoyable. Like what we're selling and what we're giving them. Yeah, it's tactical, they're gonna make money and all this kind of stuff. But it has to be fun. And like I can
Yeah.
see it in their face reviewing their calls if they're like, this is how you create a video. Like, dude, I would never fucking buy that because it sounds boring as fuck, right? So how do you inject just that excitement, especially from like a salesperson? Because not only do they have to find a problem in the pain, all that kind of stuff, but part of the pitch is not only excitement, but it's also, selling the Maldives versus the interior of the plane effectively.
Yeah. Well, what I would try to do is create a way that by which the salespeople could be speaking about themselves as well as what they're doing. If
Mm,
you have a pitch that anyone can deliver, then no one should be delivering that pitch. You failed, right? Ideally, what I want people to be able to do is to engage in a conversation that has some structure around it because you have some information you have to convey and you have some
mm,
things you have to say to get people to consider purchasing your product. But ultimately, it's a conversation. The best door to door encyclopedia salesperson in America once said that he made all of his sales in the first 20 seconds he entered the building, the house. He walked into the living room, he
mm,
inventoried the room, found something in the room that he could relate to, and began talking about that thing instead of
mm,
encyclopedias, right? And suddenly you're talking to a person who you enjoy hanging out with. And by the way, they're selling encyclopedias too. I
mm,
replaced all the windows in my house, and I have a lot of them. It was an expensive job. My wife and I interviewed five people, five companies. We didn't pick the most expensive or the least expensive. I don't even think we got the best windows, honestly. We bought Trevor Devine's windows because he walked into my house. We saw a golf club on the wall that I was using to sort of swing. And he said, "Oh, you play golf?" And I said, "Yeah, do you?" And 30 minutes later, we were still talking about golf. And Trevor said, "Maybe I should go get the window now so I can bring it in so he could take a look at the sample." I said, "Sure." And then as he was leaving the house to go get the window, he saw a basket of knitting. And he
mm,
leaned into my wife who was cooking dinner. He said, "Do you knit?" And she said, "Yeah, I do. I'm knitting a hat for a friend." And he said, "My wife knits too." They had a little 3-minute conversation about knitting. When he went out the door, my wife said, "We're getting his windows, right?" I said, "As long as they're made of glass, we're getting Trevor Devine's windows, right?" Right. He came in and suddenly he was a guy I wanted to hang out who also happened to sell windows. So if you
Mm,
can find a way to, manage a sales force that has that ability to come in and have a conversation with people so they're not watching the clock and they don't feel like they're being sold to the whole time. And it's not just a representative of a company, but a human being who's kind of cool.
mm.
All of that's going to help a lot.
It's just connecting on a personal level, right? Because the details, like the minutia and the mechanism and everything, is kind of irrelevant. Like I do find that in the space that we're all in, obviously you're like a bit of a unicorn because obviously you're a category of one. But for a lot of people, they're kind of the same as other people, and
Yeah.
it's like if the delivery is the same and you're gonna get results and it's the same shit, what is the differentiator? It's
Right.
that likability and relatability factor, and especially because the people that we work with can be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. So if I'm gonna be in bed with someone, I'm gonna have to like them. And I
Right.
think that's a huge, huge like edge that a lot of the I just think like a lot of the advice is not based on that, right? Just in general. Like a lot of the feedback you get from people is not based on truly connecting with people as a human and then playing long-term games with long-term people effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but true. I
Mm,
just think I in many of the businesses I work with, they're essentially the same as everybody else. There isn't a lot of differentiation. I was working with a bank, and basically I said, "Well, your numbers are kind of the same as everybody else. You're not like offering a greater
mm,
percentage. Your mortgage rates aren't better."
mm,
I said, "What is your differentiator?" And the CEO said, "Well, I like to think we have better customer service than the next guy." And I said, "Well, that sounds terrible because I like to think we have better customer service. How about we have the best customer service of any bank in our state? How about
mm,
that? How about start with that and then I'll like perk up my ears and listen." But that's what we have to do is we have to find a differentiator, and it's often we're going to trust someone more. We're going to feel more connected to someone. We're going to want to be in business for a long time with someone. And that's
mm,
often done by getting to know a person. And telling stories is a damn good way to do it. It also changes brain chemistry scientifically that leverages enormous powers biologically in your favor. It's stupid not
mm.
to be telling a story. 5 chemicals get released into the brain when you begin telling a story. As soon as the brain recognizes that a story is being told, 5 chemicals that all help you. They increase motivation, attention, memory. They make you feel more connected. They make you feel like part of a cohesive group. All of
Mm.
that happens scientifically. Why would you not tell a story? It's just stupid.
I'm curious, have you come across the young guy Roy Lee from Cluely?
No, I have not.
You will really enjoy this. So basically, the guy, he's like 21 years old. He built a software to basically cheat on any exam. So he got kicked out of Harvard. He got kicked out of another like university, and it went super viral. And he doubled down on it. So basically, like created like an entire story arc around it. How like he's the guy that like basically cracked like cheating because it was like legal cheating. It was just like basically a review notes basically. And then he doubled down on it further, and they built a software company called Cluely, and it went from 0 to 120 million in valuation in 4 months. And now they've raised a shit ton of money. He's based in San Francisco. Obviously, San Francisco VCs love the kind of anti system kind of attitude, and you
Yeah.
have to check out his videos, man. They're huge on Twitter. You're gonna piss yourself. They're so funny. Like he basically has this like hiring thing where like um people get bonuses when they date co-workers, and he creates a whole story arc around it, and he creates the whole thing, and the whole logic is the product itself is actually a note taker. It's an online chat GPT note taker that auto takes notes
Mhm.
for exams, meetings, sales calls, but the actual message that he has is absolutely fucking brilliant. And that's why I kind of wanted to ask you about how to tell that company story, but in a non-corporate way. And I
Yeah.
think the guys that are like 2021, he credits a lot of things to culture, society, and just trends. He's really
Mhm.
like ahead of the wave in terms of trends. So when you see something, it's like, fuck, like that's pushing the borders for sure. It's pushing that the upper echelon of what's accepted, but he gets away with it. And as a
Yeah.
result, they get millions and millions of views, perfect, completely organic. And
Yeah.
look, the company's kind of like valuation is a testament to it.
Right. Well, it sounds like he's telling the right stories for the business that he's doing as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So that those aren't stories that necessarily would work if you're working with United Healthcare or,
Of course.
Amazon. But that is a good lesson on who is your audience and therefore what kind of a story or how are you telling the story
Yeah.
based upon who's listening and who do you want to be listening.
Yeah.
Uh, so, that story audience fit is really important. It sounds like he's maximized that.
Yeah, I guess that's the most important part, like the relevancy. There's also a company called WAP, which is basically an online community platform, and they try to really lean into the make money online space. So their promo video was all done with AI, but it was Grand Theft Auto team. So they just very much leaned into that because like a lot of guys who are 19, 20 play Grand Theft Auto growing up, want to make money online, hate the school system. And again, it was another like 75 million view video with like, you know, 500,000 signups. So how important is that, right? To really dial into what is the culture and trend of your ICP.
Well, it's interesting because it worked in the two examples you gave because those are audiences that are pretty narrow in terms of who they're looking for.
Mm,
My argument is often your story should probably be as accessible to as many human beings as possible, which means
mm,
for me, I almost never use cultural references in my stories because I know that they're both fleeting and what seems to be completely known to one person, like how could you not know that, is completely unknown to another person now that the world is fractured. When I was growing up, there were three channels. You knew every single television show that was on all the time, and that was it. Right. And occasionally a band dropped an album and you had to go to the record store to get it. Like we all had the same cultural landscape, but today it's totally different.
mm,
So I tell people to get rid of all the cultural references in their story if they want the largest audience. The examples you gave, though, they don't want the largest audience. They're looking for a particular slice of the pie and they're
mm.
making a lot of money from it. And that's perfect. They should be doing it. Like, that's great. But in general, if you want a larger audience, a more broad audience, and you're not like looking for that sliver, then you should be avoiding many of those things because as soon as you say something that people don't quite know, it makes them feel like they're not part of the in crowd anymore. Sadly, yesterday in the United States, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. He's a
Mm,
right wing public speaker who had a lot of attention if you were on the very right of American politics. So I was aware of him. His politics and mine do not align in any way, but because I'm sort of aware of politics, I knew who Charlie Kirk was. When I got to work today, I mentioned to a bunch of people, like, it's a shame that we have such political violence in America today. And they said, yeah, no one knew who Charlie Kirk was. They were all like, yeah, somebody got assassinated yesterday, but I don't know who he was. Right. And
mm.
for me, it seems crazy not to know who Charlie Kirk is. And yet a whole bunch of people have no idea who that guy is at all, unless you're
Mm,
following politics.
yeah.
So that's just the lesson of if you want a large audience, you have to avoid those references. But if you know what your audience loves, and it's a smaller sliver that you need in order to make a pile of money, then you target that. So it's just an awareness of what you want.
Completely agree. And even in my own example, went into the office yesterday and I didn't know the name. I know the face when I saw it, but I didn't know
Yep.
the name because I just don't follow it. I don't follow US politics.
Right. Yeah. I
Tell
make
me.
Shakespeare, I make Shakespeare references all the time because I have read Shakespeare all my life,
Mm,
and I hear them all the time in television shows and movies. But it occurs to me, even though I hear them all the time, nobody knows they're Shakespeare. Like I
no.
hear it, and they go, "Oh wow, that's Macbeth," and nobody
Mm,
else knows what it is. But I'm aware that if I walk around talking about Shakespeare, nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. So
mm.
it is that idea that just because we know something doesn't mean anyone else knows anything.
It's like the curse of granted knowledge, right? It's also funny because you could make the same reference towards Macbeth, but you could reference the line, but not that it's Macbeth. And everyone said that it's so cool and awesome. But if you said it's Macbeth, everyone said it's not cool.
Right. Yeah.
It's all contextual. So
Yes, it is.
you mentioned earlier around suspense. So especially if delivering a pitch, and this is very relevant to me, when you're doing these longer speeches, and I find myself even in this position a lot, how do you keep that suspense if you're speaking for an hour, 45 minutes? And how important is that to hold? And maybe like focusing in on tone as well, tone and the relevancy and keeping that relevant too, because how we say things is the most important thing, right?
Well, I would say it's at least as important. With Suspense, it's all about the idea that we want to say some of the thing without saying all of the thing. So we want to think about it as we're dripping information rather than pouring a bucket over people's head. The simplest version of this is if you're delivering a speech and let's say you have slides that you're showing as well, right? What happens all the time in business is a business person will say, well, our company is founded on 3 pillars. And then the slide shows the 3 pillars. And at that point, you failed. You're done. Turn the slides off and go home, right? Because what you've done is you've shown them these 3 things that you're about to talk about, but now they know all those 3 things already. So now you're talking about something that they already know. And that's the worst thing you can do. Aaron Sorkin said the worst thing you can do to an audience is tell them something they already know. So what you do instead is you say, our company is founded on 3 pillars, and you have the word 3 pillars across the top. And then there's a number 1 and a number 2 and a number 3, and there's nothing there yet. And you say the first pillar is, and you click, and then we get to see the first pillar. It's suspense because we don't know the next 2 things. And what we've done is created a mental schema in the brain. Essentially, we've created 3 empty buckets in everyone's brain. And as soon as there's an empty bucket in the brain, we want it filled. So we want to hold back information. We want to use phrases like, there's a really important reason why this is important to our company. And I'm going to get to it in a moment. But before that, right? Watch Steve Jobs when he presents the iPhone for the first time in 2007. One of my favorite moments. He understands all of this so clearly. We could just run through that talk and you'd learn everything you need to know. There's a moment when he has introduced the iPhone. He's explained what it is, and everyone's lost their mind. And he says, and it's right here in my pocket. And he reaches into his jeans and he slides it out halfway. And then he says, but we'll get to that in a minute. And he slides it back into his jeans. So all the crazy people at Macworld who are desperate to see this new device now know that it's hidden behind a thin layer of denim. And they're basically looking at his pants now, trying to figure out the form factor based upon the shape of his pants, which is suspense, right? Which is the idea. I'm going to show you some of the thing, but not all of the thing. So what we need to do in business, if we want to hold attention for an hour, is we have to stop throwing all the information at the audience at once and then talk about it. That's what most people do. They put up a slide loaded with information that probably should be 4 slides instead of 1. And then they begin talking about that slide. If your slide is on the screen for more than 30 seconds, you're dead. It's wallpaper at that point. It becomes utterly irrelevant to the audience. So that's a simple way to create suspense. But a lot of it is sort of just saying a little bit of the thing at a time rather than the whole thing. In your example of what was the story you just said? You were
For
saying,
in my instance, like there's a presentation that's like 45 minutes, right?
yeah.
And holding that suspense, holding the audience for
So
that
what
duration of time.
are you going to tell a story as part of that?
Yeah, so let me give an example. I'll give you the full
Yeah, give me an
example. So basically, you love this. The title of it is "How to Legally Create a Money Printing Machine." Thought it was
Okay. Yeah.
pretty interesting. But we basically help business owners grow their business with content. So a part of this is there's 3 parts. It's helping them with the product, which is called the offer. It's helping them with the content. It's helping them with sales.
Okay.
And we basically do it. I do basically do it in a way that it's like the most important part to grow your business with content is to slow down and look at the offer. And then we focus on the offer specifically, and we'll go through the arc on that, what that means. Then it will go into the content. It's like, okay, here's the different parts of the content. This is the second part. But all of this means nothing without the sales process. And then we break down like that individual component. So I guess in this context, the suspense is the following 3 points are exactly what you need to be able to like, legally create a money printing machine. And we do this through this mechanism, and each individual point is super valuable. And I'll come back to these points as we discuss it. So that's what I'm trying to think through that lens. Like, what's your kind of thoughts on this? Because this is super applicable to everyone as well.
Yeah, I think you're probably doing it in the right way. Are you telling any personal stories along the way?
Yes. So again, like there's the dream outcome, which is the money printing machine. Then there's my anecdote of like how I got started, how this has been effective for me, and then like the self-deprecating factor is like what I was doing in the beginning, which didn't work. So I wasted 2-3 years doing this the wrong way, upside down. So it's all those miniature anecdotes of why it wasn't working for me and what I'd learned through that realization. And then
Can
there's
you,
also go ahead.
I was going to say, give me the beginning of your story. Just give me the first few sentences of one of those stories, your origin story there.
Okay, so we'll lean into how I started, right? So when I started creating content in 2020, I was like locked in my bedroom, constantly posting, wishing to go viral, putting out more content. And then after many years, I realized that that wasn't actually the contributor to how to grow a business. And it was
Okay,
only okay, go ahead.
so let's just fix that.
Hmm.
Okay. So what you did was you sort of said everything all at once. What I
Mm,
might suggest is you say something like this. This is suspense. You say, I'm sitting on my bed. It's 4 years ago, and I'm getting desperate. There's a computer on my lap. I'm pecking away at the keys. I've been pecking away at these keys for months now, attempting
brilliant.
to get a result, and that result is not happening. I'm trying to create content. I'm trying to create content that will drive sales. I'm sitting in my bed trying to do this, and it's not working, and I'm becoming frustrated.
Mm,
And I need this to happen because insert some stakes. I don't know. I'm running out of money. My parents don't want me in the house anymore, whatever it is. But rather than saying, I'm sitting on my bed trying to create content, I want you to be sitting on your bed, period. Then I want you to
mm,
have a computer on your lap, period. Then I want you to be pecking on keys, period. Then I probably want to know what's going on in your heart, which is I'm worried because this isn't working. I still don't know what the hell you're doing, right? The goal of a storyteller is to get the audience to want to hear the next sentence. And so if you just tell us a little bit in the beginning, it creates wonder. If you say, I'm sitting on my bed, I think, is someone on the bed with him? Right. And then he says, I'm alone. Okay. No, he's not with somebody. He's alone. I'm frustrated. Why is he frustrated? There's a computer on my lap. Is he watching porn? What's going on? Right. I'm pecking away at the keys. Okay. He's not watching porn. Right. That's what happens in the brain, right? Because we're constantly trying to predict what's going to happen next. If you don't use suspense, there's no attempt for the audience to predict. They become passive, right? We want them to be active in the story, and they become active by us giving them some of the way, but not all of the way. We want them to be guessing on the next step, but they don't
mm.
guess unless we create suspense.
That's so, so valuable, man. So it's almost like bringing them into that zone, like into that specific moment. And it's almost all imagery, right? Like
Yeah.
all of this is imagery in the
Well,
brain. It's
it's imagery on what we see, but also we want to know what's in your heart and your mind, and that creates suspense too. If you tell me you're worried,
mm,
but you don't tell me what you're worried about yet, that's great because now I'm wondering what you're worried about, right?
mm,
And your heart's beating, right? My palms are sweating. I'm worried about this, right? I'm thinking about my future and it doesn't look good. I'm still going, what the hell is on the computer that he's doing, right? So it's both creating the imagery and you start tight. You think of it as a cinematographer, right? That you are the cinematographer of your story. You're pointing the lens. You start with a narrow lens, very, very tight on one thing. And then you slowly expand that lens. So it's
mm,
I'm on the couch, right? And some feelings, right? I'm sorry, I'm on the bed. I have some feelings, right? There's a computer in my lap. We widen the lens just a little bit, right? And then maybe some more feelings, right? I'm pecking at the keys. Now the lens is wider still, right? So you're constantly widening the lens until you can get tight again. The tight lens is suspense. In storytelling, the craziest thing is this: what you don't say is more important than what you are saying, because what you don't say is what the
mm,
audience is waiting for. So you have to make sure there are things you're not saying that drive the audience forward.
hmm. Let me give you another example.
Yeah.
So later on in the speech, I talk about like a big part of our business is teach people sales. Like we teach them end to end how to run sales calls, all that kind of stuff. And a big part of it was because of this, was because for many years I would get people on calls. I would be waiting on a call for someone to join. They probably wouldn't join. And if they do join, they would say, like, what the fuck is this about? Like, why should I trust you? Why should I even put time into this? And it was about overcoming that objection that you no longer feel that people are on a call and you're sticking things down their throat. They're coming to you versus you're coming to them. Now, the example I could kind of give there is like being on a call, waiting for someone to join, having that fear in my chest, like, oh my God, what's this person going to say to me? On the back of constant rejection, constant calls, and then someone's coming in and they're experiencing that exact scenario. Yeah, what do you think about that in terms of like how do we contextually? Now, obviously, it's going to be better when I put it together, but is that more of kind of aligned to what you're saying in terms of the specifics?
Yeah, and again, I would try to get it as narrow as possible at first. So I'd say I'm dialing a phone, right? I'm dialing a phone number, right? This is the 19th phone call I have made today, right? That creates wonder. Why is he making 19 phone calls, right? And
Mm,
I'm bracing myself because the first 18 did not go well. I can't even believe that I'm about to make a 19th phone call, but I have no choice. This is what I do. This is
mm,
quite literally my only way to put food on the table is to call strangers and have them yell at me, which is probably what's about to happen. I'm going to call a stranger and I'm going to tell him I have something to sell him. And then he's going to yell at me and tell me to go to hell. And then I'm going to hang up the phone and make a 20th phone call. And then the terrible thing happens. The person on the other end answers and says hello. And I have to begin my pitch, right? Now we start with a guy dialing a phone, a lot of concern, a lot of wonder about why so many phone calls are being made that day. Eventually we get to what's actually happening in the scene, but let us get to it slowly and allow the audience again to become prediction machines.
Mm.
It's the same as when you're watching a murder mystery, right? The weird thing about that is the closer you get to finding out who the killer is, the more suspenseful something gets. As all the other, as the possible suspects get whittled down to just a few, and the red herrings are put away, and now we really know it's like it's one of these two guys. That's when suspense is at its maximum, right? And we're doing the same thing essentially. Is we're making sure that the audience is constantly trying to guess who the next bad guy is. It's not a bad guy in your story, but that's what we're really getting to do. We're just trying to get them to want to hear the next step along the journey. And part of it is holding stuff back, getting them to guess at it, predict at it, or at least go, where the hell are we? What is happening here? Right? You don't want to go too
Mm.
far. You don't want to frustrate them, but you don't want to give them everything all at once.
That's so awesome, man. Have you seen that new Netflix documentary? It's kind of all over just like Twitter and stuff too. The site it's basically like bullying of like a kid. It's like
No.
you should check it out. I forget the name of it. I watched it 2 days ago. Basically, it's like a boyfriend and girlfriend. They're like 13, 14, and then they're getting anonymous messages.
Yeah.
And the whole documentary, it's quite long. It's like an hour and a half. Is all about who is it. So they're getting these really, really like awful messages to send to the 13-year-old. And it's all from an unknown number, which by the way, apart from America, you can't numbers are public everywhere else in the world. So it's such a weird thing, but whatever.
Yeah.
Um so this guy and girl, like young people, they're getting these very, very vulgar messages, and it goes on and on and on, and it gets to the point that sometimes they're getting like 600 messages a day, and they're just like very aggressive, like bullying. Check out the documentary; you'll really like it. But
Okay.
the
That's
whole, the
great.
whole, the whole purpose of it is who is it? So they
Right.
start to eliminate who, and then the FBI come in, and the local police come in, and they're eliminating, and it's only until the end whereby it's down to like a handful of people that suspense is at its highest,
Right. Yeah.
and
You
that's
can
how
do that too. That's what we do as storytellers all the time. It's the stories aren't as exciting. You're just making phone calls in your story. But
yeah.
still, if we don't know what you're doing, it's exciting until we find out, and then we feel for you because now we're like worried for you.
Mm, that's awesome. Have you given much thought into like how presentations should end? So the kind of crescendo at the end to kind of leave
Yeah.
people basically, leave people on a very big note, like whether it's positive or negative. Have you given much thought to that? Like how do you structure that?
Typically, if I'm telling a story, for example, the ending is I see or hear something, which causes me to think something, which causes me to feel something. So I always tell people, tell me what you saw and heard.
Mm.
That final thing that created the ultimate change in you. It's what you see and what you heard, and then what you thought about it, and then what you felt about it. And that's usually the story, which is something happened in my life that caused me to think differently and therefore feel differently. And that's every story in the world. That's a romantic comedy, that's an adventure. All the stories are essentially a protagonist who has a problem or has a need or has a flaw, is on a journey, and then eventually they see something or hear something or both, and that causes them to think differently, and the thinking differently results in them feeling differently. And that's how it ends. If I'm giving a keynote where I'm trying to like land a message with them, I want them to take something away. Then I'm sort of landing on the idea of, listen, I've just spoken to you for 55 minutes, and I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes telling you exactly what to do once you leave this room. Because I do not want to be the person who made you feel good for an hour and then had
And
you forget everything about me by the time you get to the car. So let's
and
talk about in extreme specifics what you're going to do when you exit this room so that you can begin engaging in whatever I'm trying to teach for the rest of your life.
that's awesome. That's so, so awesome. And do you ever leave like a kind of like a motivational end? Like what's that kind of high point, like almost like a Churchill-esque finish?
No, I don't.
Mm.
I'm very tactical at the end. You know, I can be motivational for 55 minutes. It doesn't mean that if I'm not motivational in the last 5 minutes, I lose it all. Like that
Mm.
steam is still there. But at the end, I basically want people at the end of most of my talks to know The thing I've just shared with you is something I believe in and do myself, and it's changed my life, and I'm confident it can change yours.
Mm,
Let me talk to you about what I want you to do now. The thing I promise that if you do now, when you leave here tonight, when you leave here today, when you get home, I promise you, if you do this thing, you're going to feel the same changes and experience the same benefits that I've experienced. So let's talk about what you need to do.
mm. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I think it's the teacher in me, 27 years of teaching kids. I can
Yep.
be as inspirational as possible, but in the end, I want them to be able to multiply two-digit numbers.
Yep.
I don't end my lesson on like, so guys, you can do it. At the end, I'm like, so guys, remember, build the chart so that the chart so that you don't put the numbers in the wrong place,
Mm,
and then remember to check your multiplication tables. I give them some good tactical strategies so that they can actually go multiply a two-digit number.
mm. One of my last questions for you is around like taking action. So one of my clients is a very, very big in-person event entrepreneur. Like they do in-person events.
Yeah.
And a big thing that they focus on is like now is the time to take action. Like now is time to take action. If you're ready to take action, now is time to take action. Because like their approach is, well, if they're in that room and they're not going to fucking take action, when they go home, they're definitely not going to take action when the world hits them. So how do you position that elegantly to get people to just do shit, right? To get people to take action right now and have a lasting effect.
Well, it depends on what you're presenting. I mean, I think that's a great thing to do if what you are pitching is possible, in that moment, to
Mm,
take action, as opposed to maybe like anchoring it to something, So oftentimes, like if I'm teaching people homework for life, a concept that I strongly stand behind, right? I may say, when you leave the room today, not now, because I never want you to take your phone out while I'm speaking, but the moment you leave the room today, you're going to turn on your phone or look at your phone and look at emails. But before like you open an email, I want you to write down one thing that happened today that's worth holding on to. Like that's the
mm,
first thing you're going to write down. And then I say, when you get home tonight, anchoring it to a moment, right? When you get home tonight, ideally, probably you're having a meal with a person you love. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a kid. If you're alone, you can still do this. But when you get home tonight, when you're sitting there at dinner, if there's anyone at the table with you, you're going to tell them a moment that happened today that was worth holding on to, and you're going to add that to the list. And now you've got two homework for life moments. And then you're going to like note the fact that you're on a 1-day streak, right? And then tomorrow, when you do it again, you're going to be on a 2-day streak. And in 7 days, you're going to be on a 7-day streak, and you're never going to stop.
mm,
So, but that's not always possible. Like sometimes you do genuinely teach something that can't be replicated in the room. And when that happens, I just anchor it to a moment in their life. And I say, the next time you blank, here's what you're going to do. And you just pick something that everyone is going to do eventually,
mm.
and a place where it fits, where it makes sense.
So interesting. Is there anything you do in terms of where to drive people? I think that this is kind of like widely kind of debated in terms of like you're speaking at an event or a conference or whatever. Like, do you give people like downloads? Do you drive them to like an action? And as you said, that you don't want to take it out their phone. So, how do you think about that?
Well, I mean, my website is matthewdix.com. So,
Yeah, straightforward.
matthewdix.com is the place where you can go. And, if you remember my name, which is probably in the program at the conference where I was speaking, you're good to go. Right. So I'll say that. Also, I've written a whole bunch of books. And if you just Google Matthew Dix on the internet, you'll be able to get to all my books. You know,
Mm.
the thing I don't want to really do is, how do I say this? When I started books, I started writing books. I had to do book tours,
Mm,
right? And I'd watch these other authors, and they would read a chapter of their book as part of their book talk, which I know no one ever wanted to hear. They felt they needed to read a chapter of the book because they wanted to sell the book, and they thought giving people a sample, the first chapter, might entice people to read the book. It doesn't. No one comes to a book talk hoping that someone will read aloud to them, right?
mm,
My goal was always, I can try to sell this book, or I can sell myself as a person they're going to invest in forever, so that every single thing I make is something they'll consider engaging in. And I've always done it that way. I want people to go, Matthew Dix has ideas and writing and stories that I'm going to
mm,
want to be with all my life. Not that this particular day I'm selling this particular product, this course. I have a new book coming out. I'll mention I have a new book coming out, but I have 9 books. What I'd love for them to do is to go
mm,
to Amazon, look at all 9, and find the one that appeals the most to them at that moment. So I see a lot of value in sort of putting a QR code up on a screen or driving people to something or giving them a download. Getting on the newsletter is great for me because that means I can communicate with them on a regular basis. But ultimately, I want them walking out of the place thinking, I like Matthew Dix. He seems like a pretty good guy and it sounds
Yeah.
like he makes a lot of things. Let me go peek at him when I have a chance at home and we'll see what I want to indulge in.
Do you think that there, obviously it's contextual, but there's any harm in doing that? Like, does that break the trust?
I think it breaks the trust only if you're coming across as a salesperson. I've seen it done where in the middle of the talk, like at the 30-minute mark, a slide comes up and says, if you like what you're hearing so far, here's a QR code. Take a moment and grab it now so you don't forget later. I'm like, no, you're dead to me now. I hate you and I never want to see you again because now you're a salesperson. You've proven
Mm,
to me that the only reason you're here is to sell me something, not share an idea, but to sell me
mm,
something. If
mm,
at the end of your talk you put up a slide that says, here's ways to connect with me if you want to continue, and there's a QR code there, and there's a couple websites and maybe a link to a newsletter or something, that's fine as long as you don't speak to it. I think that as soon as people speak to these things, they become, they transform from like a thought leader to a salesperson. And there's nothing wrong with being a salesperson, but not there at that moment. At that moment, you're here to share an idea, demonstrate your expertise in something, help people's lives be a little bit better in some meaningful way. And then if they choose to see that QR code and go, oh, I want more, I want them to make the choice. Me saying there's a QR code is never going to drive anyone to the QR code. We all know what a QR code is. And if it's on the
mm.
screen, everyone knows what to do with it if they want to do something with it. So it's sort of like just stating the obvious, except you're sort of degrading some of your trust in the process.
Yeah, like you don't want it to be a trap, right? That's
Right.
basically it. Like it ends
Yeah.
up being a trap, right?
Right. It's like Steve Jobs when he used to say one more thing. He used to do his presentation and everyone knew there was going to be one more thing that he held back. Suspense, by the way, for the record, Steve Jobs. Again, right? He'd say one more thing. We all knew one more thing was coming, which meant suspense, which means we weren't going to stop listening to him. And the
Mm,
one more thing was always one more amazing thing that the device he was presenting does, right? One more thing should be your QR code. It should be, I'm done talking. Oh, by the way, if you want to stay connected with me, here's some ways to do it. One more thing. And I can choose to engage or not. It's when people get specific about it that they
yeah.
suddenly degrade the trust. And it's just stupid to say. Because if you think you have to reference a QR code that's, 3 feet high and 3 feet long right behind you, like if you think you have to say something about that, you're crazy. Like everyone
Mm,
sees it, they know why it's there, they know what it does. If they don't know what it does, they're not technologically sufficient to be engaging with you probably in the first place.
mhm.
So show it, but don't mention it is what I would suggest. Or demonstrate the confidence from, I'm not going to try to sell you a damn thing. My name is Matthew Dix, and I was so fucking good today that I don't need to show you a QR code because my name and my ideas are burned in your brain. And I am confident that if you want to find me, you're going to remember exactly who I am. I think there's a lot of confidence behind that is appealing to people too.
Yeah, because I think the reason why I have a bit of internal, what's the word? Like internal like resistance is because like that's kind of inherently what I want, right? Is like I want to, which I usually do, is just like really plant a good idea, hopefully speak fucking well, because I feel like a lot of the business bros don't actually speak that well. Like that is an edge, right? That's a real wedge if you can just speak well. And
Yeah.
then most importantly, then is connect with people afterwards, like whether that's actually in person at the event. It's like speak to me and my team, and we're happy to speak to you afterwards. Like grab
Yeah.
me afterwards, we're happy to speak with you. And I feel like that's generally where we get the most success. It's just I get welcome to these split stages, similar to you, and yeah, just interesting to see like your perspective on it because I completely agree. I think that when you when you build the trust for 55 minutes and you burn it for the last 5 minutes, it's like fuck me, you may as well not have been there.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. Speak well. I met a guy in Vancouver this summer. His name's Tuan Lee. He's a millionaire at the age of 24. He's mastered TikTok and Instagram, and he makes content for huge companies. And we were at a picnic, and he had heard me speak for 4 days at this conference. I had been on and off the stages the whole time. And he came up to me and he was like, "Why aren't you on TikTok?" And I said, "Oh, I've never even been on the platform. I sort of stay away from those things." And he goes, "You should get on TikTok." And I said, "Well, what would I say?" He says, "It doesn't matter what you say. You talk so good, you'd be great." And I
Mm.
said, well, my stories tend to be long. They're like 6 minutes. I had never been on TikTok. He goes, no, that's fine. I'm like, a 6 minute story on TikTok? Really? He goes, you talk really good. You'd be
Mm.
great on TikTok. So I came home, told my production manager, I met this guy. He said we should just throw a story up on TikTok and see what happens. He tells me it's going to be great. I think he's probably crazy, but he is a millionaire or, multimillionaire. So I said, let's give it a try. So he put up a 6 minute story of mine on TikTok, and it's up to like 1.5 million views in 8 days. Right. And
What?
it's because I talk good, right?
Yeah.
What you just said, like speak well and everyone will remember you, right? If you speak well, you don't need a QR code. You speak well,
Mm.
you don't need to like be pitching products from the stage because people will remember you. And so
Mm.
that was that was something I believed. And now that I've seen what happens on TikTok, if you speak well and tell a good story, you know, uh, I never expected a 6 minute story to get 1.5 million views in a week,
Mm.
but that guy was right. He knew what the hell he was talking about. It is a superpower. So if you can get on a stage and speak well, I think you can sell less because people are going to remember who you are. I think the people who throw up all that other stuff, they know that they have to throw all that stuff up because people are not going to remember them otherwise.
I agreed, man. I think like the cream always rises to the top, right? And
Yeah,
to finish on this note, but Chris Williamson, as most people know, I know his manager very well, like on a personal level. He's a mentor of mine as well. And I sat down with him one day and I said, like, what actually is it? Like, why is it that he is such an outlier? And he's just like, look, he could do fucking anything, and he would be number one at it because he's just like his ability. So it's like he didn't need any flashy videos or whatever. Now he's great production, but it's inherently that he is like a top performer, whatever he does. So the idea is a cream rises to the top. What he's done is he picked his own genius, 100%. But like if you were to remove a lot of the production value, he would still be amazing at speaking
yeah,
and delivering the message. And
right.
that's it. That's the main thing, which is like at the end of the day, we talked a lot about foundations in the beginning of this conversation, but the end of it was tactics. But the tactics is actually fucking irrelevant if the foundations are super weak, which is the exact same when you're business. When we're working
Yeah.
with people, it's like you have to have the strong foundations. And yeah, tactics are important, but they're also, as you said, fleeting. They're very, very fleeting.
Yes, I agree. My speaking management team, when we got into business together, they're like, "You're not even trying." Like, they're like, "How are you getting all this business? You're not even trying. Like, you're
Mm.
not on any social media. You don't have a reel. But what happens is people hear me speak and they go, I want that guy. I demonstrate that I can do the job even if I'm not selling myself well enough.
Yeah,
Right. So now I have a team of people who are going to sell me better than I've ever sold myself before. But
agreed.
frankly, I'm not interested in that part of the business. I choose to be, in terms of my zone of genius, videography, web design, all that, not my cup of tea. I don't want it to be. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in telling better stories, helping people tell better stories, finding new strategies that help people tell better stories.
Yeah.
I'll let everyone else take the rest for me.
And man, that's why you've been in the game for a long time. Is because if
Yeah.
you got caught up doing like the admin, BS stuff in the background, you'd hate yourself and you'd be out of the
Yeah.
game, which is very
And I'd
important to
have
lean
less
into.
and I'd have less content. I'd have
Yeah.
less knowledge because I would have spent less time doing the job.
100%. Yeah, man,
Yeah.
it's the one piece of detail that you need to add in. It's a dentist effect, right? Like the dentist just comes in, he works on the teeth, everything else is taken care of by the admin and the secretary and everything. But
Yeah.
man, I want to say a huge thank you. You're an absolute legend. Like you truly are a huge, huge inspiration to myself. And to many people that are literally close to me as well are going to be super excited for this. I don't think you realize it too, right? It's like I think it's a curse of granted knowledge. This just comes so second nature to you. But it had such a big impact on so many people already to this point.
I'm very glad. Thanks. I really appreciate that. It's really kind of you.
Thank you, sir.